RNIB, Opening Up Creative Culture. Describing 3D objects. Louise Fryer. Louise sits at a kitchen table, a small box in front of her.
So describing two-dimensional pictures is one thing, but when you move on to three-dimensional objects, you have a whole new set of challenges. So what I have here is a wooden box. It's made of mahogany. It was made in Victorian times, so it's around about 150 years old, something like that. And what it is a travelling medicine chest. In fact, it was designed to have at home in case you didn't have access to a doctor. It would have been intended for someone who was relatively wealthy and was able to afford all the little potions inside. And what you need to do when you're describing it is, first of all, know what it is, and then ask yourself a series of questions about it. So, what's it made of? What's its function? How does it work? Is it a model or the real thing? So in terms of what it's made of mahogany, but it also has elements of brass, and in the top, flush at the moment with the top of the box, is a little brass handle, and it has a little place where you can insert a fingernail in order to lift it up, and that would allow you to carry the box. And then in the front of it, at the base, is a drawer, and there's another little handle, but I can't operate it at the moment because there's a secret to this box. So I'll shut that, I'll open the lid, and inside it's full of glass bottles, and it's lined with a lovely rich red velvet fabric to protect the contents inside. And at the front edge, near the lock, is a little brass rod, and this brass rod lifts out, and it was securing the drawer. So now that I can have free access, I can lever open that little brass handle, it's quite tricky to do, and slide open the drawer, and there are the rest of the contents. And what it is a domestic medicine chest. So it was designed for people to use in their home when they didn't have access to a doctor. So inside are all the medicines in glass bottles, the original bottles, and I'll take this one out. It has its original label, which says calcined magnesia, and then the name of the supplier, Fisher, Toller and Company, Chemists, 18 Conduit Street, Hanover Square, London. And one of the nice things about the label is not just what it says, but the typeface that's used and the handwritten copperplate script with which it's written. So that's the kind of visual information that tells you that it's old, and that's the kind of information that you'd want to convey. Because this is small enough to be held, you may well want to hand it over to the person to handle if it's not a pre-recorded audio description and they're sitting near you. But if you do that, you need to just be aware of a few things. So this glass bottle, for example, which is also original, also has its contents, which were chamomile and ginger. Not quite sure what that would have cured you of. The problem with this bottle is that it's broken. So when you handed it across, you would want to prepare people for the fact that it still has a sharp edge here. The stopper no longer comes out of it, but because it's glass, it's particularly fragile. So you don't want the person to injure themselves. You want them to be able to prepare for the kind of size and weight of object that you're about to hand over. So that kind of information needs to go in advance. And then in the drawer, there are various things. I mean, you could talk about this object for hours and hours because there's lots and lots of written text as well as interesting artifacts to explore. And inside is this little booklet which is called Domestic Medicines, Their Doses and Uses in the Absence of Professional Assistance, with tables of weights and measures. And it's like a recipe book, but to make all sorts of things you probably wouldn't want to eat. So that little booklet you could chat about for quite a long time. It's really interesting in terms of its content, not very interesting in terms of its visual appearance, apart from the fact that it's just small enough to tuck into the drawer here. Now, given the number of different elements in this object, you would need to think of how much information you were going to talk about, how much people were interested in it, and if they were with you, they could guide you by asking you questions about it, by looking slightly bored, in which case you might curtail your description. But what you want to work out is the structure. So when you're creating your description, having found out about the box, having found out its dimensions, when it was made, what it's made of, the different elements that it contains, the key thing about description is how you link all that together. So are you going to go on a journey? For me, this is the kind of object that suggests a little quest. So it has an element of mystery about it. For example, a closed box could simply be an empty box. And the fun thing about it is that once you open the lid, you discover there are things inside, and then once you remove the brass rod, which gets a little bit stuck, but once that's open, then there's a whole little hidden drawer underneath. And so taking people through stage by stage, that you gradually reveal more and more. It's like an original cabinet of curiosities, the kind of thing that would have appealed to an 18th century gentleman, because you could contain all sorts of things within it. So if we slide that back in, fit the handle back into its recessed position, slot the rod back in place, you might want to do that, shut the lid, and there we have it, a domestic medicine chest.
RNIB, supporting blind and partially sighted people. Logos for Arts Council England, Punch Records, Imagineer Productions and Ironbridge Gorge Museum Trust.